Welcome to the Big Screen Bulls podcast, a podcast where Caleb Kendall and Christian McCright give their reviews and reactions to what's happening on the big screen. They talk about films, TV series, and other forms of media entertainment. Episodes are released every Monday. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. Be sure to follow the show's Instagram page at Big Screen Bulls Podcast, where new hints and updates will be released about future episodes.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Big Screen Bulls podcast, where you have me, of course, Caleb Kendall, like I said in the intro, and you have my associate, Christian McCright, here with me.
Good morning. Good morning.
And if you're listening to this at night, stop listening, listen in the morning.
At 12 a.m. I want you to get out of bed right now. I don't care how early you work.
Or that reminds me of that scene from SpongeBob or whatever. It's like, who eats a Krabby Patty at 3 a.m.?
Oh boy, 3 a.m.
Oh, it cuts to Patrick. Oh boy, 3 a.m.
Gosh, that show is amazing.
Stay tuned for the future. We might push something out with it.
There we go.
This is a quick housekeeping items. If you listen to our first episode that we go into the House of the Dragons, kind of our first thoughts of the season, thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for coming back to this one as well too. And this is as we keep going forward. I know we've heard a good amount of feedback, a lot of it good, some of it bad. Just keep us in mind. If you don't like something we push out, again, you're welcome to call us an idiot or whatever else. I've heard it my whole life. It really doesn't matter to hear it again.
Dude, we're being called idiots all the time. Ain't no different now.
But we have a special topic we're going to talk about today. It almost ties into the first episode we ever pushed out about House of the Dragons. And this is the original that really sparked up the controversy and really brought us all this new content within the Game of Thrones universe. And that is our thoughts on Game of Thrones.
Like our general overview thoughts on all 8 seasons, and including some tidbits here and there, maybe some of our favorite characters, favorite moments, things such as that. Fair warning, kind of like the last episode that we did, this show is rated TV MA. It is for mature audiences, so we may go over some topics that are a little more mature. It is a super long 8-season show. It's on HBO Max. Like I said last episode, if you don't have it, please get it. HBO Max is great, and go ahead and give that show a watch before you listen to this, because there will be spoilers ahead.
Yep, and HBO Max, this is going out to you guys, Warner Brothers. Please sponsor us.
Yeah, please sponsor us. You are my favorite streaming service. Please sponsor us.
But getting into Game of Thrones though, I think even just really important, just going through the origins of like where Game of Thrones came from.
Go ahead,
and that's what
give it to us.
Yeah,
give it to us.
And that's what at least I've seen getting into it is it started off as a book. If you guys didn't know that, if you guys just got into the season, I know we talked about it in the first episode, but Game of Thrones all originated from a book, and it started in 1991 is when George R.R. Martin had really started kind of the first season. So we're talking about like a 17-year time skip from when he started to when we started in 2008 when Game of Thrones came out. Within that time, I'll never forget, we had a teacher that talked to us about how the books were never that much of a successful franchise, but no, he sold 70 million copies from the time before Game of Thrones had really started, and it was like translated in like 30-something English or 30-something languages. So this was a complete success of a book before it even hit the screen for us to view it.
The big screen.
So that's where it started. And Game of Thrones, even get context on that, it started in 2008, and what year did it end? Was that 19 when it ended?
The show?
Yeah.
Yeah, about 2019.
2019, 2020. I don't know the exact dates on it right now, but we're talking about over 10 years of development at that point to go through the whole entire season. So there's a lot to cover within it. A lot. Starting from the very, very beginning, losing characters all along the way, and having very, very complicated backstories for everybody.
This show is notorious for killing off characters.
Oh yeah, that's what it's known for. At the end of the day, like when you watch other media and content, this is kind of how Game of Thrones is different. This is why it kind of reached out to you and said like, hey, this is why you should be invested for the long haul. You have a main character. The main character miraculously lives throughout the whole entire all these seasons, all the series and stuff like that, and wins the day. It's like typical old school storytelling. The main character has a mission. They struggle along the way, but they eventually prevail. This isn't like that. So it makes you always wonder and makes you always guess.
Who's going to live and who's going to die? There's like 20 main characters. There's like, now, of course, I'm probably exaggerating quite a bit. It really leans into the story of House Stark. So like in the land of Westeros, if you haven't seen the show and you're still listening to this, there are these kingdoms that are kind of divided. I mean, like there's like the kingdom or like the realm of Westeros. And so there's different houses and different, royal families. And then there's people who aren't royal, but they're still technically houses based on last name. And in the northern part of the land of Westeros is a place called Winterfell. And they are headed by House Stark. So the lineage of these people are all, they have the last name of Stark and they marry and whatnot, and they just keep the Stark line going. They don't marry within each other. I just wanted to preface that beforehand. That may have sounded weird.
Other people do.
Other people do.
Series.
So it follows mostly House Stark because most all of the characters within the household, most of them, not all, are main characters, including Jon Snow, played by Kit Harington, Sansa Stark, played by Sophie Turner, Arya Stark, played by Maisie Williams. There's their mother, Catelyn Stark. Can't remember who plays her at the moment. And Ned Stark, the legendary Sean Bean. If you ever need a guy to just die in all your movies, he's the guy. He's the guy for you. And then they have a couple of other brothers, Bran, who is also one of the main characters, and then a couple younger ones that aren't as prominent in the story. So I won't really mention much of them. But you kind of follow them and they kind of split up. And this whole show, the reason why it's so long is because they kind of split out due to the events of the first season. But I'll go ahead and let you kind of explain kind of how that goes about.
Yeah.
Just
so
background information.
Yeah. So, and yeah, if you just heard it from Christian here, biggest spoiler of Game of Thrones. I swear, if you do not turn it off, you haven't watched it yet, or if you want to watch it, right now is the time. You got 1, 2, Sean Bean, main character, Eddard Stark, gets killed in the beginning of the first season. And that's where it kind of really gets to you. It's that, he's the main character. There's no way that he can die. He's a good guy. He's honorable. He has all these things going for him. He's a likable character, and they take him out. And just like, as Christian said too, you see the issues come up of all the Stark children. You have a couple other houses, House Lannister, which is kind of the rulers of their domain, and they're part of the western part of Westeros. You have the Baratheon house, which are kind of the rulers of the southeast in some ways.
The Stormlands.
The Stormlands, what they call it there. You have Dorne, which is in the very south, and you have Tyrells, which is in the southwest. With all these groups, there's a lot of history within it. It's almost like this thing was written like a history book in some ways too, where there's a deep history that goes into all these families, all that they've been through, who they were named after. But just like you said, all these characters have very, very complicated backstories. And this is like another thing I really like about Game of Thrones is how in depth they go into these characters, and then how much they change when they start at the beginning,
Right?
And at. So if you watch the series, you'll see one of the main characters is Jaime Lannister. And Jaime Lannister, first look of him, he's kind of cocky, sure of himself. Nobody can really chop him down really too much. And you see a traumatic event happen to him where he gets captured, and he comes out the other side almost acting like a completely different person.
Right.
And even you have this scene that's kind of in the later seasons where he's having to fight a battle, and he kind of alludes back to a previous battle he had to fight too.
Yeah.
That he learned from, and then he brought that into the series, or brought that into the future battles that he had going forward. And all 20 characters, whoever else it is, they're all the exact same.
Right.
So it's miraculous that they're able to get through this. It's kind of like, and I refer this to other literature, like it's like Breaking Bad. Like Walter White, you see Walter White season 1, episode 1, kind of a scared teacher type, and you see him go into season 5 and almost not even care about the life anymore.
Right. He's he's Heisenberg at that point.
Yeah.
Like he is this new persona that he's created.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
He's so jaded that you could have the same exact scene happen to him in season 1 and season 5, and you're still going to be drawn into it because you see the character development the whole entire time that just keeps pulling you in.
Right. So a lot of these characters, they have very complicated. They all have their own backstories, and so part of why this show is so long is because they're jumping between all of these characters, just like the books. Because the books, they're not really separated into like chapters. It's separated from just points of view, and there is like a chronological order to it of sorts. But it's mostly just focusing on like, this is a world and not like a singular person story. And this definitely establishes by season 1 that it is a cruel and unforgiving world, which is why like Sean Bean playing Ned Stark is like so prominent. He's very honorable, very likable. And like he's like the stand-up guy. But Cersei Lannister, who is Jaime's sister, basically like tells him that like this whole thing is about the Game of Thrones. Like you either win or you die, and there's no gray area. There's no in between. And basically the plot that kind of starts off this entire season is that Ned Stark figures out that Jaime and his sister Cersei are, well, they're together. They're incestuous, and he is questioning the rightful line of Joffrey Baratheon, who is supposedly like Cersei's and Robert Baratheon's kid. Robert Baratheon at this moment is the king of Westeros. So he's questioning whether that son is the legitimate heir, and he confronts her about it. And eventually, meeting up with other characters such as Peter Baelish, who's one of my favorite characters, you learn throughout this first season as they set up the political intrigue and soon enough the White Walkers a few times, that this world is cruel, it's unforgiving, it's brutal, and anything you say and do can be used against you by anybody.
Yeah. And you add Daenerys Targaryen into that same exact mix, who is a character that's on the Western lands, which is
right. She's in a different region.
Continent, I guess, or different country, you could say, that's separated from the main country of Westeros. And she's trying to build reputation, build an army to come back home because Westeros was her family's kind of original ground. They were actually kings of this land long before the new king, Robert Baratheon. The Baratheons had taken over to become king.
Right.
So she's going back to try to take her family's ancestral homes, and because they ruled for hundreds of years,
right,
in Westeros.
Right. So there's kind of like the background information for you. You have all the Starks, who are kind of, I would say, the main characters in the story. After Ned Stark dies at the end of the first season, he gets decapitated for, quote, like treasonous allegations and actions. So he dies, and that sends off a chain of events of all the Stark kids kind of disperse off. Jon Snow, because he is a bastard. He is allegedly Ned Stark's son with another woman. And so he is sent off to the Wall. He wants to become a person of this thing called the Night's Watch. He goes off to the Night's Watch. He wants to be an honorable man of the Wall. So he goes there. Robb Stark stays and rules Winterfell. Arya Stark goes off like into hiding, and she's on this like revenge path of trying to stab everybody with her little sword that she calls Needle. And Sansa Stark is caught in most of the stuff that has to do with some of the worst people imaginable in this series. She's caught in King's Landing for a good portion of the time with Joffrey Baratheon, who is, after Robert dies, Joffrey, the kid who is the incestual kid, he takes the throne, and he's a piece of crap. He's horrible to people. He's horrible to everyone. And so Sansa's stuck with him, has to deal with all that stuff, and eventually she is stuck with other horrible people. before we get a little bit more into that, why don't you explain why people should watch this show?
Just like I said with the whole Breaking Bad deal, like this show is very, very long. The show goes from 2008 to 2019, 2020-ish. So that's 12 years, 11 years of content. But the content is so fresh all the time because the person that you watch in season 1, episode 1 is a completely different person when you get into season 8 and get into all that. So if you really want to watch something that you see somebody completely different throughout the whole entire timeline of things, you're not going to watch the same thing over and over again. That's one thing I think a lot of shows just miss, is that desensitification of a character hits the high point and they keep making the character hit that high point and make the same exact actions go over and over, time and time again. Game of Thrones, you don't really have that. And you have 20 characters to play with, so you can make 20 characters hit their high points at different times, and it depends on who you're invested into that character as well too.
Right.
But that's one thing, again, too, it'll just drag you in. You'll be invested. You'll have an idea of who you want to win the Game of Thrones.
And it'll constantly surprise you and basically slap you in the face a couple times.
And your opinion will change sometimes too.
Yeah, it will change.
Throughout the whole piece of it. So I'd say if you want to watch a show that will bring you in, almost treat you like family, you won't know what's going to happen next to it. At the same time, Game of Thrones is probably the show for you because, again, in modern culture today, I think we've watched and have seen a lot of stuff just regurgitated over and over and shoved down our throats. With MCU, I kind of think of some things like that as well too. It's, hey, we're just watching the same exact content over and over and over again. It's getting kind of boring. It's getting kind of dull. You will not feel that at all when watching Game of Thrones. You will see something completely different. You will see characters that will learn from their mistakes, and you'll be happy when they finally learn from their mistakes. It's not going to be that, oh, this character's so one-dimensional, they always had this or this issue. It's that character learns from that mistake and keeps fighting forward. Right.
I think so. You were the first one to introduce me into Game of Thrones, and I was pretty hooked early on. I remember a couple years ago in college where I was with my roommate, Zach Edwards. Shout out to you, man. I really wanted to show him Game of Thrones because I figured he would like it, because it's not just about like just like a medieval time period. It's not like this general medieval fantasy. What this really is a character dive. It is to show you that in a cruel and brutal world that people aren't exactly what you think, and like the line between good and bad isn't as clear.
Yeah.
Because good people will do bad things and bad people can do really good things. And so I said, hey, like, you want to come watch the first couple episodes of Game of Thrones? And he's like, oh, I don't know. And I was like, we have like a handful of hours of free time. And he was like, okay. And he ended up, we sat down and I turned it on. And after the first 3 episodes, I was like, or the first 2 episodes, I was like, okay, like, we can go ahead and just do something else if you want. And he looks at he looks at his phone and says, well, let's do 2 more. And it just cascaded until we were watching like a handful of episodes like every like couple nights. And it just, and even for me, that was the second full time I had watched it. And even for me, I didn't want to stop. Knowing everything that was going to happen, knowing the future disappointment of season 8, which we'll get into here pretty soon.
And that's why I like you mentioned too, and I said it again in the House of the Dragon episode, but every character is a good guy in their own storyline.
Right.
And that's hard to believe in our aspect. It's, we have the good guys, we have the bad guys. Good guy somehow beats the bad guy. Again, I mentioned that kind of earlier in this episode too, but we don't really have that too much. So you're really confused, and it makes you really think. And I've mentioned I really like novels. I really like movies, episodes. I really like it when they make you think. So that's again another reason. If you really like to be challenged mentally and just have to focus, watch an episode. It'll do that to you. But I think on that end, how about we get into some of our favorite characters that really came along? I know we're getting pretty deep into
Yes.
this, so what are our favorite characters that come along? So Christian, I could tell you're excited, so go ahead and hit us with it. Favorite characters? Do you got top 3? Do you just want to hit us
Ooh.
with it?
Okay, so I did not prepare this beforehand. This is just based on like instinct. I'm just doing it on heart, on what's in here. So I'm gonna go with top 3, even though there's a lot of characters. It's easy to do like a top 10, but I don't want to take up too much time. So I'm gonna do a top 3. Number 3 is probably going to be Peter Baelish. You know this. Most of my friends know this who've heard me talk way too much about Game of Thrones. Peter Baelish is one of my favorite characters because he embodies one of my favorite parts about Game of Thrones and about Westeros, and that's the political intrigue, which I mentioned on the last episode that we did. The political intrigue and the backstabbing and the he's your friend one moment, but he's not the next because it's based on personal ambition. He's a guy that's come from like little nowhere. They call him Littlefinger, and he finds himself in positions of power just based on his own sheer will and intellect, which is like he never wins any major battles. He's not some sort of powerful heir. He finds himself in positions of power just by, as I said, sheer will and intellect, being able to move around his chess pieces so carefully.
Yeah, and we're kind of nerdy guys as well too. So again, physically, we're not going to be the strongest, the mightiest there. So it's what can equalize the playing field, and maybe
Right.
that's
Yeah, it's definitely a relatable aspect to where like, yeah, like I'm not the most athletic person, and I haven't like I don't have any outstanding accomplishments necessarily, but I try to do what I can in life based on being good to others, but also sheer will and intellect. And I
Yeah.
feel like that's he is an embodiment of how that can go very wrong, and I love that.
yeah. Maybe
So
just being a snake, just kind of like yourself.
Hashtag Slytherin. He has had so many great moments, great quotes, great lines. I have like a small album of his quotes saved in my phone. And of course, that's from like a few years ago. That's like not recent. So I don't know how. I mean, if you want to judge me for it, go right ahead. I know it's there. I looked at it the other day and I didn't delete it, so I'm keeping it around. Actually, speaking of that, I do want to go over just real quick one of my favorite things that he says, and that is chaos isn't a gaping pit waiting to swallow us all. Chaos is a ladder. Many who try to climb it fail and never get to try again. The fall breaks them, and some are given the chance to climb, but they refuse. They cling to the realm or the gods or love. All illusions, only the ladder is real. The climb is all there is. Of course, I don't like theologically agree with all of that, but I think it's such an interesting quote because when Varys, who's another very big like political intrigue character, is talking to him, like he's like the realm will fall into chaos, and Peter basically says like, you don't understand what chaos actually is. Like you think that chaos is just something where it'll spiral out of control and nothing good will ever come of it, but chaos is a ladder that the right people will know how to climb it and take control. And that's just fascinating. That's fascinating to me. So anyways, that's why he's my number 3. But who's your number 3, or however many you want to do?
Yeah, honestly, I was just gonna hit one with it, and this might be in
It's
your
just
list.
one?
Yeah, I'll go one with it,
All
just
right.
because there's only been really one that's really stuck out as my favorite character. There's been times beforehand where it's like, no, I'll do two. I've got 2 that are pretty high up. 3. No, I'll do 3. Never mind. I changed.
Theon Greyjoy.
Most despised character in my eyes. Just to go invite everybody into my life here. Just daddy's boy. I'll tell you what. Let's say number 3, and we lose him pretty quick, but Khal Drogo.
Really?
Khal Drogo is the embodiment of a badass. Christian's laughing here, but
that was very straightforward.
yeah, it's that's what you gotta like about him.
Yeah,
Like, the fight scenes are just like he's not even trying when he's fighting, like in fight scenes. He's just making promises of how you're gonna die, and he makes it happen.
He's Aquaman. I mean, what more can you say?
Yeah, he's Aquaman. And I know at the beginning he has some questionable sexual appetites and all that craziness, but at the end of the day, he loves his wife. He does everything to protect his wife, and even goes so far to raise an army and start conquering just to be able to raise enough money to buy a fleet so he can go back to her homeland and reconquer the throne. Which, again, if you've been listening to the beginning, it's Dany's husband, Daenerys Targaryen. Her husband is Khal Drogo.
Yeah.
And how he just interacts with her brother, who's kind of spoiled and stuff like that. It's just he's like,
yeah, it's an understatement. Yeah,
he almost
he's a jerk.
He's awesome. He's just strong. Everything else, doesn't take crap from anybody. And yeah, just if you just as a conqueror and stuff like that, it's just pretty neat to watch his development and watch him just go. That's all I got to say on
your number 3.
On my number 3.
My number two favorite character. I go back and forth with this quite a bit, but I think I'll pin it down to Jaime Lannister.
Okay.
Yeah, he's a lot of people's number 1, and like I don't blame them like whatsoever.
But you said that if you just watch the first 3 seasons.
Yeah, if you watch the first
crazy.
3 seasons, like he's kind of a nut job, and he's a jerk. He's very obsessed with his sister in more ways than one, and that causes him to do all sorts of questionable actions. But he has one of my favorite moments in the entire series, and that is so after the first 3 seasons, or at least within that time period, he gets captured. He ends up getting his hand cut off eventually, and that becomes a huge thing for him because he's known for being like a warrior and a fighter.
Yep, and he's right-handed too. The hand that he gets cut off is
right, correct,
dominant hand that he uses to fight with. Just context.
Yeah, so for a while he thinks that he's lost like his worth because he doesn't know how to fight. But his escortee or his escort is Brienne of Tarth, who is a woman who wants to be a knight, and people make fun of her for that. And she's a great character. Love her a lot. And she is charged with escorting him, and she is obviously very wary of him, and he tries to kind of use his wit to kind of get out of certain situations, and it doesn't work on her because she knows she can take him now, and he's struggling to use his left hand with stuff. But he's so fascinating because since from that period and on, he grows so much. And he eventually, and this is one of my favorite moments in Game of Thrones. He gets into a hot bath, and he's sitting across from Brienne, and like people are constantly making fun of him because he's known as the Kingslayer. The last king before Robert was Aerys Targaryen, and Jaime Lannister killed him. And so people call him the Kingslayer because he is a king's guard. His oath is to protect the king, but he ended up killing him. And so in that moment, he's almost weeping. He's very close, and he's basically talking about how people call him the Kingslayer and thinks he's so bad, but they don't understand that he was a madman, that he was burning people alive, and he was enjoying it, and he was literally a psycho. And so he said, what would you do like if you like heard your king wanting to say like burn them all and to kill innocent children, innocent lives? And so that really brings you into like his perspective of, mostly he's a jerk because of, his own personality and his own upbringing and his family. But even though his relationship with his sister is very, very wrong, he does love her. He loves his brother Tyrion. He loves his kids. He does love and care for people. And he does want to protect some innocent people. And so you really get to see him progress. And as the show goes on, he becomes more aware of how he and Cersei are very differently minded. And Jaime grows more compassionate, more empathetic. and eventually when the White Walkers start to come near Winterfell, he leaves Cersei, the person he loves, to come and fight with the good guys, with all the other main characters. And it's such growth for him. Unfortunately, they do throw it out the window in season 8, which we'll get to in a little bit. But that's why he's my number 2, is because he is also the embodiment of character growth, of people think I'm horrible, but they don't really know me. And I think he's amazing.
Yeah, I'd say my number 2, actually his little brother, Tyrion Lannister, is my number 2. Biggest thing I could think about Tyrion, he's a realist. If you don't know, again, Tyrion, he's played by Peter Dinklage. He is a little person. So kind of his whole life, he's really been taunted, called an imp, a dwarf, called a mythological creature that, and he has to deal with that. And he accepts that for what it is. But when he accepts that, he accepts life is what it is too. Life is rough. It's not fairy tales or sunshines or anything else like that. And you really see within his character, like when he's at one of his first political events with his dad. And that's another thing too. It's before setting this up, I know he's a little bit older looking in the TV series, but like in the books and stuff like that, he was just like becoming old enough to really deal in politics, and how he was able to hit it really, really hard. But he had a scene where he's around his dad and all of the war advisors, and they just captured Jaime Lannister within the Stark's camp, where he has a big moment come about. And they're all debating on what they should do. One says, we should go back to Lannisport. We should raise a bigger army to go fight. One says, no, we can take him. We need to go to the Whispering Wood to retake. It's like, we need to do what we can to bargain and get Jaime Lannister back. And in the middle of all this, Tyrion knocks over a glass, busts open and stuff like that. It's like, you think you're going to bring Robb Stark to the dinner table or to the negotiating table now?
Yeah.
He's like, there's the realm after you chopped off Ned Stark's head.
Yeah.
And just look at life. It's like, there's nothing we can do here. We're not going to bring him to the table and have him negotiate with us. We could have brought him if we had his dad still alive. But no, we messed that up because my sister, your daughter, was ruling the kingdoms, and she did a terrible job of it.
Yep.
And then that really brings into the points. Again, Tywin sends everybody else out and says, you're going to go to the capital, and you're going to be hand of the king, and you're going to deal with this. And he goes into the capital, and again, not to get political with this, but like kind of like drains the swamp. Like he goes in, sees everybody that was a close advisor to his sister, everybody else, and just gets rid of all of them. He gets up to the person that ran not the King's Guard, but the gold cloaks, and just like, yeah, you have no honor. You stabbed the last hand of the king in the back when you should have been faithful to him. We're sending you to the wall. Maester that poisoned one of the last hand of the kings, you're gone.
Yeah.
And just like all this corruption and stuff that you guys made here in the last 20 years, whatever it is, we're clearing all that out. We're going to make a well-ran kingdom. What do our finances look like right now? In terms of Peter Baelish,
He takes control.
yeah. It's our finances are terrible. We're the richest family in the kingdom, and somehow we're all still in debt.
Yeah.
What is going? And it's just Tyrion drained the swamp. Tyrion 2024.
That's right. Tyrion 20. He transforms how Westeros is supposed to look, at least like financially, and how King's Landing is supposed to operate.
Yeah. And other people that are just like really non-biased see that and are like, wow, I really like how he operates. He just wants things to work. He's a realist. He looks at the real picture and wants to see it really work. So that's what I like about him. Again, he's a very witty character. He has to think himself out of situations because, again, he's not physically endowed to back up on it since he is kind of a little person. Again, he kind of falls through a little bit too in the last seasons, but
Yeah.
we'll go into that when everybody finally turns the volume up to see our rant on it.
Yeah. Actually, I want you to go ahead and tell me your number one. I kind of want to hear you kind of.
Number one, I mean, we can call you a snake. We can call me basic because I'm picking Robb Stark as my number one. Again, I think
Of course you are.
Everybody's favorite character at one point in time. Just like seeing the backstory of his honorable father is killed, and his dad, who taught him everything about being honorable, being truthful, being all this, and he has to take all of this and have to figure out how to deal with all of this, even though he's like the show or in the books, he's like 18, 19 years old or something like that. He has to lead a war to try to regain his sisters back, regain house honor back, and really just put down the people that have been trying to ruin the whole entire country for the past 20 years, 30 years.
Right.
And his justice is smooth. It's slick. It's what you'd want to see almost in a Conqueror and what I saw in Khal Drogo, but we saw it at a very, very young age. A kid who's not very sure of himself just yet, but he's getting there. But he's getting there, and he has all these older people that surround him. And I think this maybe even ties into me personally. Like, I'm a very young guy, and the industry I work in is a very older industry. But having somebody really, really young and experienced come in and being able to hold up their own, I think really reaches out to me, and that's why I liked it so much. Like, he's at the dinner table with Umbert, which is one of the houses that are supposed to be loyal to House Stark. And the Umberts are a very, very large group of people. They said they were like endowed with giant DNA. So they're big. And he's one of the best fighters in all of Westeros.
Yeah.
And Robb is an 18-year-old kid who has to tell him, no, we're doing it my way. And again, he has his wolf come in, help him out, attack Umbert and stuff like that. Hurt him. But your meat's tough is what he says, which, like, you're all right. Like, you're green, but you're just like your dad. You're awesome. Like, you're what we need to lead this army. And just as he goes in, defeats all these armies, you start to hear fairy tales about him. Like, he's able to turn into a wolf himself and destroy a whole entire camp just by himself.
He almost becomes like a living legend.
Yeah, exactly. At like 18, 19 years old.
Yeah.
And just how he's able to like progress with all this power too. Like, when you see power in Game of Thrones bestowed upon somebody, more than almost likely they ruin it or they mistreat it. And you see him do it in some of the later parts of his life. But I think when you see him get Jaime, when he captures Jaime Lannister finally, he's like, everybody's cheering and whooping and hollering and stuff like that. He's like, what are we cheering for? Is the North free? Have we got my dad back, your lord? Are we done fighting?
Yeah,
no.
He's very hard.
Yeah. Very, very.
He's very mature.
Yeah.
For his age.
Exactly.
Now, he did make an egregious mistake of, he found a girl that he likes and he decides to be with her, but he was already pledged to marry one of Walder Frey's daughters. And if you don't know who the Freys are, the Freys have the twin towers, and they're essentially like a bridge between certain parts of the region, and a lot of people have to go through them. And so he pledged himself to one of his daughters, and then kind of went back on that by getting a girl that he likes pregnant, and that was a big ordeal. And so he was a mature guy who's done so much good, who was starting to be a conqueror of sorts, who was brought down by his own fatal mistake. But that's an interesting choice. That's actually the number one choice for a couple people that I know, including Zach Edwards. Shout out to you again.
The last shout out you're ever getting on this podcast. No.
Last shout out you're ever getting. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, but that's why Robb Stark's my favorite character. And to be honest, too, on the whole Walder Frey deal, again, if the Lannisters didn't have the most crazy pulls, most luckiest luck that you could ever luck, where somehow the Baratheons just eliminate themselves miraculously, a giant army that just gets dissolved by one guy killing his brother.
Yeah.
Like, he would have had enough men to really succeed it. And then if Theon Greyjoy would have actually done what he said and helped him out and get a fleet to
poor Theon
to attack the Westlands and stuff like that, maybe we would be all right.
Maybe be a completely different show.
Yeah. But it wasn't. That's why we like it, though, because, again, I was rooting for one side of it. My side lost the Super Bowl.
We lost the big match.
And then you just got to kind of pick another side to get a hold of, because Except in this game, if you lose the Super Bowl, you never get a chance to play again.
Right. Because your character didn't even make it halfway through all the seasons of Game of Thrones. So my number one character. Now, I've gone back and forth on this a few times. I've changed up my list a few times since watching it, about 3 times over. At one point, my favorite character used to be Tyrion. Then it used to be Tywin. But I've settled down to Samwell Tarly.
Oh, man. That's coming out of left field. Christian McCright goes.
Baseball. I love Samwell Tarly. He's so wholesome and kind and smart. And not only does he have character growth kind of like Jaime's, not in the same fashion, but like he was sent to the wall not because he did any egregious crime, but his father just hated him. His father hated him and didn't think that he was worthy enough to hold the title of Tarly, because he wanted to sit inside and read books, and he was overweight and couldn't fight. But this man does so much throughout all the seasons, and he grows so much, even though still by the end and by the long night, he's still not the greatest fighter. He's a character that proves that you don't have to be. And not only that, but he's not a great fighter, but also he doesn't need some sort of wit and intellect to like backstab people and go around people to get himself in good positions. He achieves through just being a good person. He is one of the only characters, if not the only one, where his pure innocence and empathy wins out. He's the only exception to the rule. And he falls in love with this girl named Gilly, and she's kind of awkward, but they have a very adorable relationship. He really is looking out for her. They have a kid together, and that's like a huge thing because he's trying to protect her, and he kind of sends her away. He is one of the first to actually kill a White Walker and to discover the secret of Dragonglass. He is such good friends with Jon. He's good counsel, good advice. He helps Ser Jorah. He takes off his grayscale, which was known to be an uncurable disease that if you got it, you're basically doomed to die. Other than Stannis' kid, rest her fictional soul, Shireen. But other than that, like this disease was known to be nearly uncurable, treatable, but uncurable. But he did it. Technically he wasn't supposed to. He wasn't supposed to perform that surgery, but he's the only character who's been completely rewarded with minimal consequence just for being good. And at the very end, after everything had happened and they're choosing a new king and whatnot, Samwell Tarly's sitting right there, and he becomes the Grand Maester at the very end, and which is a perfect position for him because he is smart, he is compassionate, he is empathetic, he is kind, he is aware, and he's come from such a hard place and seen so many bad things that he would be able to give good counsel and good advice. And I think that he is the character that has the best justice done. And that's why he's my number one. He's just, I talk about how all my 3 favorite characters are like the embodiment of something. And this character is just the embodiment of good, of good, because even though not everyone is perfect, and sure, he's not in different ways, he's done some cowardly things. He tries to do his best, and even going outside of his comfort zone many times to do what he can for his friends and for his loved ones, and tries his best never to do anything bad. And he's the only character where he gets out clean for that. So he's my number one. I love him.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I know it's we've talked before we did this episode. We've talked before in the past, and it's always been a different one. That's never been in your top 3 before, so
Yeah.
that is interesting. But yeah, going past favorite characters, what's something we didn't like with it
Something we didn't like with
with Game of Thrones?
Game of Thrones.
What are some of the hot takes of like what is there not to like?
So from a perspective of someone who's seen it, so I'm mainly just talking to those who have seen it. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. May not want to listen to what I'm about to say.
We still recommend it, but there's nothing's perfect in life.
No, it's still a great show, but I call it the living sparkler. You know, like the sparklers you get on 4th of July, you know, you kind of light them up. It kind of takes a little bit, and all of a sudden, it really blows up, and then after a while, it kind of fizzles out. That is what I don't like, is because, yeah, like it's long, but I can kind of excuse that because I'm a person who kind of likes longer movies. I like longer TV shows, longer movies, because it gives you more time with the characters. I'm totally into that stuff. So the only things I can say I don't like is there's a little bit too much brutality and a little bit too much sexuality for my taste. I can get past some of it, but some of it was unnecessary.
I agree. Like there is a pretty good amount of like sexual scenes, and it's not like just like brush off their kissing or something like that. Like
it's yeah,
it shows a lot. And I kind of understand the meaning of it. Like it's trying to understand the meaning of power.
there are some that are genuinely important. There are some scenes that hold such things that are actually that tell pieces of the story and pieces of characters.
Yep.
It's not just trying to do like, oh, the cutaway romance scene, and then they just wake up the next morning and the plot moves on. It's not like that. There is, in a lot of cases, actual meaning behind what they're doing.
Yep.
And sometimes there's dialogue and conversation that is actually important. But there's a lot of it where it's just kind of thrown in there for the sake of showing that Westeros is kind of a nasty place.
Yeah, and I just think like, and even when it just shows like, I think it just shows like power. Like,
Yeah.
like when you think of power, you think of money, greed. You think of lust as also being in that same category. And I think that's where it's trying to get it into. It's like, hey, this is a form of power. Like you see, like it's a form of somebody able to disrespect or in some ways too. So I kind of understand it, but it's still just, it's not like you don't need to have it on there for that long. I don't know, but
Right. But the main thing that I didn't like about the show is it fizzles out, going back to the sparkler analogy. So it's, as it gets to season 7 and season 8, the writing and the storytelling becomes so different that things start to not make sense. Characters do things that are out of character.
Yep.
Tyrion goes from being like the smartest person to like the dumbest person alive. And they throw a lot of character development out of the window, and that frustrates me so bad. You can probably hear it in my voice. Because Jaime Lannister is one of my favorite characters. And he spends this entire time getting away from Cersei and becoming his own character, only at the very end for them to say that he's going back to her.
This is what everybody's been waiting for right here. Season 8. Let's rip into it. Yeah, keep going.
I mean, so he tries to escape in the middle of the night after being with Brienne of Tarth, which everyone was rooting for. Like, yes, like Jaime and Brienne have such good relationship and they've really grown with each other, and they finally do the deed. And all of a sudden he escapes in the middle of the night to go back to Cersei, and he gets captured, and Tyrion's talking to him alone. And he's like, you know, if you go back, you know, then the city's going to fall tomorrow. Daenerys Targaryen will burn this place down or otherwise. And, he said, do you want to put innocent lives at risk? Like, why would you do that? And he's like, I never really cared for them, innocent or otherwise. That is one of the dumbest lines I've ever heard, because in his conversation with Brienne about why people call him the Kingslayer, and yet he killed King Aerys to save innocent lives, he then goes back now to say that he doesn't care about innocent lives, which is totally, I mean, they totally flipped the script. That's just being shocking for the sake of being shocking. That's subverting expectations just for the sake of it, and not because it tells a good story.
Yeah. And that's what I think a lot of people were looking for, is that at the end of things, like, yeah, she's willing to destroy the whole entire city. just so she could say she could be queen. Like you almost see like that same exact story of like Jaime having to kill the king because of that. Like you thought that was going to happen again, which again, Game of Thrones, of course, you're always known to throw us off and
Right.
throw a screwball into it. But like, man, you get that. You get Daenerys goes crazy in the middle of it.
She just kind of flips.
Yeah, she just like turns completely around. It's like
There's a little bit of precedence for it, but it within like latter season 7 and like early season 8, it just kind of happens.
yeah, it's
with
like
no explanation.
yeah, 0 to 100 real quick. With Daenerys is crazy. Like she's like, okay, I could start to see where this is starting coming from, but like, it's like okay, now it jumps over the edge a little bit.
If they ring the bells and surrender, then they shouldn't burn down the city. And Cersei rings the bells, and she burns the city anyways.
yeah,
And it's like, that's nuts.
like, and I understand, like, yeah, you can go in, destroy the city to an extent, but like, yeah, when it's over,
Doesn't make a point.
yeah, when it's over, it's
But no, she's flaming people in the street.
yeah.
Just
After they've obviously surrendered.
yeah. And these are just innocent people who are running around, like just walking in the normal day. And a dragon comes in and just starts breathing its fire into the city streets, not even at specifically where Cersei Lannister is at, but the innocent people specifically.
Yeah.
And that is very out of character for her. And if that's how the books end up going, then I hope that George R.R. Martin has a better explanation and a more slow and simple explanation to why that is.
Yeah.
And by the way, just to let you know, the books are not finished. I don't know if they'll ever be finished. But
and then you have somebody on the throne that it would have never imagined you could be on the throne. You have emotionless, responseless,
I can't.
the three-eyed raven, Brandon Stark, whoever it is,
Gosh.
all sits on the throne, and he literally, he says like 5 words.
What makes a good king? A person with a good story. And who has a better story than Bran the Broken?
Well, I've been waiting for you to ask this the whole time. Like, yeah, Jon Snow, the real rightful heir to the throne. I guess I figured out that, like, again, he had to kill Daenerys because she was crazy, which I don't know why he had to make her crazy in the first place. But
Bran says, why do you think I came all this way? But he literally just told his siblings earlier that he doesn't want to rule, and he doesn't want to rule Winterfell.
Yeah.
And it wasn't Winterfell specifically. He just said, I'm not interested in stuff like that. Oh my gosh. And Daenerys had 3 dragons, and one of them got shot down by Euron Greyjoy's fleet. And literally, the writer's interview explanation for this in person, you can go on YouTube and watch it, is he literally says, Daenerys forgot about the Iron Fleet. When I was watching this with my roommate, Zach, I mean, I literally about slammed my head into my desk.
yeah,
She forgot.
and I think that's where it just gets into here, and not just to beat a dead horse with it, but like you had all this buildup. You gave us 12 years of buildup that we were just waiting for this to all happen. We gave you 12 years of our lives. 12 years. And like I think Naruto, like if again we'll get into anime eventually, but Naruto did it one of the best ways. Like you build something up for all this time. You give us this many years of waiting for the ultimate villain, the ultimate goal to be provided, and they finally get to the point where they can give it to us, and they just break our ankles with a nasty crossover.
Yeah, I mean, so all this to say that Game of Thrones is still enjoyable because there are parts in season 7 and season 8 that are really enjoyable.
Yeah.
Some great action scenes. The
Again,
Long Night is really cool.
Peter Baelish gets what's coming to
Yeah,
him.
he gets what's coming to him. It's a awesome scene. It's the only scene that I actually genuinely like Sansa Stark as a character. I don't like her at all. That's just my personal opinion. But there's some good stuff to love even in the 2 seasons that aren't very good. But that's just one of my problems is the big main problem is the living sparkler. When you have something that's so explosive and so beautiful and so bright, and then all of a sudden right at the very end, it fizzles out and there's nothing you can do about it. It's gone. It's done. The sparkler's over. You can't redo it now. Yeah. You can't relight it. So hopefully they'll do better with House of the Dragon, but
which I think they are.
Yeah, I think so far, like it's they're doing time skips and stuff, and they're building up to something. But
And the books are fully written on House of the Dragon.
right, yeah,
And that's another thing too, just on Game of Thrones, and we get off this season 8, season 7 kind of debate. It's like I almost think like Game of Thrones is almost like it's poorly that they put it first. Like it's like a lot of the whole entire Game of Thrones, most of it's like, talking about, there was a day back in the past where everybody fought a lot harder. Battles are a lot more interesting. There was more dragons burning each other alive. And you started at this time period. Like, we can't start with the most interesting period, and then it alludes back to that time period. And it's like, I was paying attention when I watched the older seasons, and I get that. I like that.
Yeah.
But no, it has to hit us with the whole entire, everything's going to be the latest episode, and now we got to go into the prequels to go through, like your Star Wars.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that'll be a topic for another day for sure. But yeah, they throw away a lot of character development, a lot of character storytelling. There are a couple people who do get their rightful justice, including obviously Samwell Tarly. He gets his good ending. Tyrion actually has a fairly good ending.
Yeah.
I like how Bran basically tells him, like, hey, you've messed up all these things, so you're
Yep.
going to spend your life fixing it as Hand of the King. Very fitting. Love that stuff. And Theon Greyjoy also has a good ending. He stands up to the Night King. Of course, he gets walloped and he immediately dies. But he
kind of gets that last little bit of like,
Yes.
hey, you're forgiven. Like Bran kind of gives him
Bran
that.
looks at him and says, "You're a good man."
Yeah.
And oh my gosh, I about cried. I'm still like right now, like my face is kind of like switching a little bit. But some people did get a good ending, but overall, that's the main problem is you've got to learn how to stick the landing. But the problem is they didn't have any books to go off of.
Yep.
So they either had to skip to the end of whatever the story actually is or make it up. And I don't know which one it is. They're not clear.
Yep.
So
Exactly. But yeah, I think but yeah, we gave you a good opinion what we thought about on Game of Thrones. So again, everybody, thanks for coming in to listening. Thanks for listening to our first episode if you had. And again, if you want to be a bowl, all you got to do is do what, Christian?
So go follow our Instagram page at Big Screen Bowls Podcast. Become a part of the hashtag Bowl Nation.
Hashtag Bowl Nation.
And go ahead, and we release episodes every Monday. So be sure to listen into next time. And if you follow our Instagram page and you follow us on Spotify or Amazon Music, or then we will eventually give out new hints to future episodes. So stay tuned, and thanks for listening. Go watch the show too. I know we just ended on kind of talking about the bad parts of it, but please go watch the show. It is worth it.
Yep, 100%. Thank you guys again for coming to watch. Hashtag Bowl Nation. Have a good one.